a NASA engineer with 33 years of Mars mission experience, published a 47-page document 3 weeks before dying of sudden cardiac arrest at age 58. The document contained detailed descriptions of image anomalies he claims NASA deliberately excluded from public releases. His name was Dr. Robert Harrington. He worked on Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter imaging analysis from 2006 to 2019, and his final confession describes structures, patterns, and objects that he says NASA classified immediately upon discovery. Here's what a career NASA engineer claimed was really in the Mars data before he died under circumstances his family calls suspicious. Dr. Harrington wasn't a fringe conspiracy theorist. He had a PhD in planetary geology from MIT, published 34 peer-reviewed papers, and received NASA's Exceptional Service Medal in 2011. His career was stellar and conventional until 2019 when he abruptly retired at 56, 3 years before his planned retirement date. According to his daughter's statements to investigative journalist Linda Moulton Howe, her father became increasingly paranoid in his final 2 years. He told family members that certain Mars image analyses were being classified above his security clearance, despite him being the senior imaging specialist. He described being excluded from meetings about specific orbital regions and having his access to raw Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter data restricted in 2018. But here's what makes his confession credible. The document he published includes specific image coordinates, sol numbers, and frame IDs from actual Mars missions. These are verifiable references to real NASA image archives. He wasn't making vague claims about aliens. He was providing exact locations of specific anomalies he personally analyzed. His documents surfaced on a private server maintained by former NASA contractor Richard Hoagland 3 weeks after Harrington's death. The family claims they didn't know he'd written it. NASA issued no official comment on Harrington's claims, which is standard protocol for ignoring unauthorized disclosures. But the silence itself raised questions because NASA typically debunks Mars conspiracy theories publicly. For Harrington, they said nothing. Harrington's confession begins with Cydonia Mensae, the region containing the famous face on Mars. His claim isn't that the face is artificial, which has been debunked multiple times with higher resolution imagery. His claim is that geometric patterns in the surrounding terrain were deliberately cropped from public image releases. He provides specific frame numbers from the Mars Global Surveyor mission from 1998 to 2001. According to his analysis, certain frames showing the region around the face contained what he describes as right-angle formations, parallel linear features, and geometric spacing that he calculated had less than 0.001% probability of occurring naturally based on geological erosion models. Here's what he claims happened. When he flagged these patterns to his supervisors in 1999, the images were reclassified. The public releases showed the face itself at high resolution, proving it was a natural mesa formation. But the surrounding context images that showed the geometric patterns were released at significantly lower resolution or cropped to exclude the formations he'd identified. But here's where it gets specific. Harrington lists image frame MGS MOCE 0301234 through E0301267 as containing these patterns. These frame numbers exist in NASA archives. What Harrington claims is that the publicly available versions are degraded or partial compared to what he saw on internal systems. Independent researchers have downloaded these specific frames. Some show linear features that could be geological layering or could be something else depending on interpretation. The smoking gun isn't there because the resolution isn't high enough, which is exactly what Harrington claimed, that the high-resolution versions were withheld. Harrington's most explosive claim involves Curiosity rover images from Gale Crater. He states that in 2014, Curiosity photographed objects with reflective properties inconsistent with Mars' surface composition. These objects, according to his analysis, showed spectrographic signatures matching metallic alloys not found in native Martian geology. He specifically references Curiosity Sol 809 NavCam frames from October 2014. According to Harrington, these frames showed what he describes as a partially buried cylindrical object, approximately 1.2 meters in length with surface reflectivity, matching manufactured aluminum or titanium alloys. Here's his claim about what happened next. The images were reviewed by materials analysis team, flagged as anomalous, and reclassified within 48 hours. The public release of Sol 809 imagery excluded the specific frames showing the object. When researchers requested the missing frames through Freedom of Information Act requests, NASA responded that the frames were corrupted during transmission and unrecoverable. But here's the problem with that explanation. Curiosity's image transmission system includes redundancy and error correction. The probability of losing multiple consecutive frames from the same NavCam session while surrounding frames transmit perfectly is extremely low. Harrington calculated the odds at less than 0.001% based on mission data transmission success rates. Independent researchers examining the Sol 809 image sequence notice a gap. Frames 001 through 008 exist. Frames 012 through 024 exist. Frames 009 through 01 are missing from public archives with the explanation that they failed to transmit. Harrington claims those three frames showed the metallic object from three slightly different angles as the rover's mast camera repositioned. Veles Marineris is Mars's massive canyon system, 4 times deeper than Earth's Grand Canyon. Harrington's confession describes what he calls impossible regularity in certain canyon wall formations photographed by Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter's HiRISE camera between 2009 and 2015. He specifically identifies a section in Koprich Chasma, one of Veles Marineris's largest canyons. According to his analysis, HiRISE images from this region show linear features running along the canyon walls at regular intervals of approximately 37 meters. He claims these intervals are too precise to be natural fracturing patterns and suggests they could be artificial terracing or structural reinforcement. Here's what makes this claim interesting. Harrington provides the math. Natural geological fracturing follows power law distributions. Spacing between fractures should show random variation clustering around a mean value. The patterns he identified show regular spacing with less than 3% variation across dozens of measurements, which he says is statistically impossible for natural formation. But here's where conventional geology pushes back. Columnar jointing in basalt can create remarkably regular geometric patterns. Devil's Tower in Wyoming shows hexagonal columns formed by natural cooling processes. Mars could have similar geological processes creating regular patterns through physics rather than engineering. Harrington acknowledged this in his document. He states that he initially assumed geological explanation until he analyzed the three-dimensional structure using stereo pair imagery. According to him, the features show construction characteristics that don't match cooling column formation. Specifically that the spacing remains constant regardless of the underlying geological strata, which would be unlikely if the pattern was caused by cooling stress. Harrington describes a crater in Meridiani Planum, near where Opportunity rover operated, that shows what he calls clear modification. Appears in orbital imagery from Mars Global Surveyor in 1999, showing typical impact crater morphology with raised rim and central depression. Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter imaged the same crater in 2012, showing significant changes. According to Harrington's analysis, the crater's interior had been excavated. The rim had been partially leveled on one side, and material appeared to have been removed rather than naturally eroded. Here's his specific claim. The volume of material missing from the crater between 1999 and 2012 was approximately 12,000 cubic meters, based on elevation mapping from both image sets. Natural erosion on Mars proceeds at extremely slow rates due to thin atmosphere and minimal water. He calculated that removing 12,000 cubic meters of material through wind erosion would require approximately 8,000 years based on current erosion rate models. But here's the counterargument. Mars experiences occasional massive dust storms that could accelerate erosion dramatically. The 2018 global dust storm buried the Opportunity rover and fundamentally changed surface features across large regions. A localized storm between 1999 and 2012 could theoretically cause rapid erosion in a single event. Harrington addresses this in his document. He notes that surrounding craters of similar size and composition showed no comparable changes during the same period. If storm erosion caused the modification, similar craters in the immediate vicinity should show similar effects. They don't. Only this specific crater shows the excavation pattern he describes. This is Harrington's most controversial claim. He describes analyzing ground-penetrating radar data from Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter's SHARAD instrument, showing subsurface structures in Arcadia, Planitia that he interprets as artificial construction, approximately 50 meters below the surface. SHARAD uses radio waves to map subsurface features, primarily to locate underground ice deposits. According to Harrington, certain SHARAD profiles from Arcadia Planitia show geometric void spaces with regular dimensions inconsistent with natural cave formation. He specifically describes rectangular chambers, approximately 20 by 30 meters connected by linear tunnels. Here's where this gets technical. SHARAD data interpretation requires distinguishing between signal reflections from different subsurface materials. Ice, rock, and void spaces all produce different radar signatures. Harrington claims the signatures from these features don't match known geological formations and most closely resemble empty chambers with solid walls. But here's the massive problem with this claim. SHARAD resolution is approximately 15 meters vertically and 300 meters horizontally. You can detect something is there, but precise geometry is extremely difficult to determine. Interpreting rectangular chambers from SHARAD data requires significant assumptions about signal processing and reflection patterns. NASA's official interpretation of these features is subsurface ice deposits with unusual layering caused by repeated deposition and sublimation cycles. Harrington argued, this explanation doesn't match the radar signature patterns, but his interpretation requires accepting that his radar analysis methods are correct and NASA's are wrong. Causse Vallis is an ancient outflow channel, suggesting massive water flows billions of years ago. Harrington identifies a specific section of this channel that he claims shows artificial modification, specifically a 14-kilometer segment that maintains perfectly linear trajectory with less than 2 degrees deviation. Natural water channels meander. Even the straightest natural channels on Earth show curves, variations and irregular geometry caused by the physics of fluid dynamics and varying substrate resistance. According to Harrington's analysis, this segment of Causse Vallis is too straight. Here's his mathematical argument. He modeled water flow dynamics for ancient Mars, atmospheric and gravitational conditions. His models suggest that natural channel formation under those conditions should produce sinuosity, the measure of how much a channel curves, of at least 1.2 to 1.4. The segment he identified shows sinuosity of 1.01, essentially a straight line. But here's the geological counter. The channel could be following a deep fracture or fault line in the bedrock. Water flowing along a pre-existing structural weakness would follow that geometry rather than natural meandering patterns. Linear valleys on Earth often follow fault lines, creating remarkably straight features despite being entirely natural. Harrington considered this and argues that the surrounding geology doesn't show the fracture patterns you'd expect if a fault line existed there. He also points out that other sections of Causse Vallis don't show this same linearity, suggesting whatever caused the straight section was localized to that specific area. Harrington claims that Spirit rover, which operated from 2004 to 2010, photographed anomalous structures in the Columbia Hills region of Gusev Crater that were excluded from public image archives. He specifically mentioned Spirit Sol 1223, where he claims the rover's PanCam captured images of geometric rock formations that his analysis suggested were artificially arranged. According to his confession, these images underwent special review and were classified as potentially sensitive under a NASA protocol he describes as NSC 88. A classification category he claims exists for Mars, discoveries that could impact public perception of Mars missions. Here's the problem with verifying this. The Sol 1223 image sequence is publicly available. The images show interesting rock formations, but nothing obviously artificial. What Harrington claims is that specific frames within that Sol were excluded from public release, and that the available images are a subset of what Spirit actually photographed. But here's why this is hard to disprove or prove. NASA doesn't release every single image from every Sol. Data storage and bandwidth limitations mean mission teams select which images to downlink and which to prioritize for public release. Images deemed scientifically uninteresting often aren't downloaded at all. Spirit's memory was overwritten constantly, meaning images not specifically downloaded were lost forever. Harrington claims the missing images weren't low-priority scientific data, but rather were specifically excluded after review. Without access to internal NASA mission logs showing which images were reviewed and why downloading decisions were made, there's no way to verify his claim. Here's what Harrington's confession implies, if any of it is accurate. But here's the massive question nobody can answer. Why would NASA hide this? The common argument is that revealing artificial structures on Mars would cause mass panic or religious upheaval. But that assumes humanity couldn't handle the information, which is condescending and probably wrong. The alternative explanation is simpler. Harrington's pattern recognition in ambiguous data led him to see artificial structures where none exist. Pareidolia, the tendency to see familiar patterns in random stimuli, is well documented. Mars rocks that look like faces, skulls, pyramids, and statues appear regularly in rover images. None have survived scrutiny at higher resolution. Dr. Harrington died of cardiac arrest at age 58. His family describes him as healthy, active, and showing no prior heart conditions. The death occurred 3 weeks after he uploaded his confession document to Hoagland's server. His daughter publicly stated that her father told family members in his final months that he felt watched and that his communications were being monitored. He allegedly told his son that if anything happened to him, they should make sure his document became public because they'll kill me for this. But here's the reality of sudden cardiac arrest. It kills 350,000 Americans annually, including many people with no prior symptoms or known risk factors. Harrington was 58, male, and worked a high-stress job. Cardiac arrest at that age and profile is tragic, but not remotely suspicious from a medical standpoint. The alternative is conspiracy. NASA or affiliated organizations eliminated Harrington to prevent disclosure. This requires believing that NASA has both the capability and willingness to assassinate American citizens on U.S. soil. That's an extraordinary claim requiring extraordinary evidence. Timing alone isn't evidence. Here's what's true. Dr. Robert Harrington existed, worked for NASA on Mars missions from 1986 to 2019, and died of cardiac arrest in 2021 at age 58. A document attributed to him exists containing detailed Mars image analysis with specific frame numbers and coordinates. The images he references are real and publicly available. Whether the publicly available image versions differ from internal NASA versions, whether image gaps in public archives represent corruption or deliberate exclusion, whether his radar interpretations of Arcadia Planitia features are more accurate than NASA's official geological explanations. Here's what's speculation. Whether artificial structures exist on Mars, whether NASA has classification protocols for anomalous discoveries, whether his death was natural or suspicious, whether any of his claims about restricted access and meeting exclusions were accurate. The document exists. The images exist. The anomalies he describes are subject to interpretation. Natural geology can create remarkably regular patterns. The human brain is wired to recognize faces and structures even in random data. But statistical analysis of spacing regularity, radar signatures, and crater modifications can also identify genuine anomalies. If Harrington was right, we're not alone in the solar system and never have been. If he was wrong, he was a brilliant scientist whose pattern recognition systems found patterns that don't exist. The images are there. The frame numbers are real. The interpretations are yours to decide.